So, if you're someone who has, let's say, you've read a lot of pop psychology about how amazing vulnerability is, but it leaves you kind of scratching your head, or you might even be shivering in revulsion because you don't really know what that means, then you're going to be interested in this particular segment. Because if vulnerability sounds like weakness or leaving yourself open to getting hurt, then it's likely that you haven't quite figured out your boundaries yet. And any attempt to practice vulnerability is typically going to backfire on you and or doom the relationship. But first I want to clarify that it is true that vulnerability is a requisite for deepening intimacy. But if emotional boundaries confuse you, then it's likely that you tend towards one of two conditions. And that is emotional crowding, sometimes I refer to this as emotional leakage, or emotional isolation. Okay? So the first step to practicing healthy vulnerability is learning how to differentiate between healthy and unhealthy boundaries. Now, that might leave you wondering, okay, but how do I know? What's too rigid? What's too loose when it comes to boundaries? So that is what we're going to talk about here today. And more specifically, we're going to talk about three things. And the first is how to recognize when a boundary is being stimulated. Number two, I'm going to give you a case example that's going to demonstrate how emotional crowding and emotional isolation influence our boundaries and in our current relationships. And thirdly, I'm going to offer you 7 questions, or we might consider these journal prompts, to help you clarify your emotional boundaries today. So I invite you to stick with me until the end because I really think that these questions could help you start to experience less, let's say, emotional confusion and start feeling more confident in yourself right away. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Brianna McWilliam, and I am a licensed and board-certified creative arts therapist, author, and educator with more than 15 years in the field, helping adults struggling with insecure attachment go from self-doubting to self-sovereign so they can attract those soul-shaking, passionate partnerships that they want without having to talk in circles around their feelings for hours or even years on end with no tangible result. And I do this using a psycho-spiritual approach to creative arts interventions using the McWilliam method. Today, I'm going to be sharing a clip of a live stream event that took place inside my private Facebook groups, which people can access once they've purchased one of my online courses. If you're interested in finding out if you might have insecure attachment, check out the link in the caption of this video. You'll be able to take an easy 4-question quiz and find out your attachment style, plus a detailed explanation. Now, if you like what you see in here, and you haven't yet, make sure that you like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. I put up videos once or twice a week, and sometimes I will do occasional live streams through my YouTube channel, and I wouldn't want you to miss out. So first I want to talk about how to recognize when a boundary is being stimulated. So having a healthy awareness of your own personal boundaries right from the get-go can head off some of the heartache that we experience in our relationships because it is foundational to putting you into a healthy and an optimistic mindset when it comes to your partnerships. So I want to give you an example of how to recognize when a boundary is being stimulated. So here's a condition. My partner doesn't want to do the things that I want to do. So now you have a boundary response. Do I give up what I want, or do I honor my desire? Now, insecure folks tend to express an over-reliance on conditions, which weakens their boundaries. So, for example, anxious open hearts might do something like, or say something like, I will either sacrifice my needs or try to manipulate the situation so that the attachment in this relationship is preserved above all else, even if I find it emotionally or spiritually dissatisfying. So the boundaries become too loose, and as a result, they become either invasive or they become smothering by virtue of being kind of uncontained. Okay. Now, avoidant rolling stones, they may have an inner monologue that sounds like, these conditions are intolerable, so I'm going to give up everything just to avoid it, regardless of whatever the cost is. So this is an expression of boundaries being too rigid and over-contained to the point of isolation and deprivation. Nothing new can get in. Okay. And then when this happens, when our boundaries are weakened in this way, and I'm going to add that rigid boundaries are also weak, because consider anything that is rigid, give it enough force, and it becomes fragile, right? It cracks quite easily. Now, when this happens, we get lost in what I'm going to call the contrast. So it's basically the idea that either of those two circumstances is better than the psychic death that I would experience if I were to be abandoned physically or emotionally, which is the open heart's inner monologue, or taken over and annihilated through some kind of smothering attention or demand, right? And that is the rolling stone or avoidance inner monologue. Okay. But a secure person might express a more flexible preservation of their own personal boundaries and the desire that is being stimulated. So they might say, is there another possibility that could be equally satisfying for both of us? Are abandonment and complete self-sacrifice really the only answers? So attending to your inner being means that you are becoming increasingly aware of your boundaries, and that informs your desire. Okay, so expressing healthy boundaries might sound something like this. I'm cool with following each other on social media, but I'm not cool with sharing passwords. I'm comfortable kissing and holding hands in general, but not in public places. I'm okay with regular texting, but I don't want to receive multiple texts within an hour. I want to spend time with my friends and family on the weekends. I need quiet time to myself every day, at least for 1 hour. I'm comfortable with some touching, but I'm not ready to have sex. Okay? So secondly, I want to explore a case example of how emotional crowding or emotional isolation can play out with a complex condition. All right. So this is a question from someone that I'm going to call Kim. I find it difficult not to blame myself for the way things turned out. My parents provided for me, and they were loving and they were well-meaning. My father could be controlling and condescending as well as reactive at times. My mother tries but tends to not be very helpful. Her immediate response is usually to tell me that she doesn't know what to do. Then she gets upset, claiming, I'm such a failure as a mother, and then I feel guilty for burdening her. Am I just ungrateful? Okay. Now, Kim suspected for a long time that she might have avoidant or fearful avoidant tendencies because she'd read a list of characteristics that hit home for her. But she still struggled with attributing some of her behaviors to her upbringing because she felt like she'd been very fortunate in her life. Her parents provided for her financially. There was no abuse or neglect. They were still married. Overall, she experienced them as loving and well-meaning. If things were going wrong in her life, it must be her fault and no one else's. But I would have you note that Kim felt like she was more emotionally present for her mother than her mother was emotionally present for her. So for example, if Kim would express her feelings, her mother would be at a loss of what to do and then lament what a terrible mother she was for not being able to help her. Now, in effect, this forces Kim to abandon her own difficult feelings, to assuage and validate her mother's capabilities. Okay, and this is an example of preoccupied parenting. Okay, so basically, Kim's mother is expressing the message, I experience your bad feelings as a criticism of me, and I find that intolerable. So I'm going to make myself feel twice as bad as you do so that you have to take care of me instead, and I don't have to feel like I'm a failure of a mother anymore. Now, this is what I call emotional crowding. And it's when someone dismisses your feelings by over-emoting and crowding yours out. So on the outside, they might appear to be very emotionally in touch or accessible, but functionally it affects to dismiss anybody else's emotions. And if you can't connect to someone else's emotions because you don't recognize or accept them, then your emotional displays are not connecting you to anyone. And in fact, it's pushing other people away. Now, Kim also described her father as being emotionally abusive in terms of being controlling, condescending, withholding, and then reactive, which we could attribute to a more dismissive parenting style. And this is emotional isolation. So, Kim had an experience of a lot of emotional dismissal growing up in her childhood, and especially with confusing outward displays of how emotions are supposed to be handled and expressed, even though she had what everybody else would call a normal upbringing. So Kim tends to attract in her adult relationships circumstances in which emotional crowding manifests itself, and she feels polarized towards emotional isolation. So, for example, a previous partner, who I'm going to refer to as Tony, did something thoughtless and disrespectful, which involved large amounts of alcohol, flirtation with a high school girlfriend, and a suggestive picture posted online. When Kim confronted him with the issue, he appeared dramatically apologetic. I know, it was awful. I feel so bad about it. It was so terrible and thoughtless of me. How can I make it up to you? Whatever it is, I'll do it. I feel so bad. Oh my God, whatever it is, I'll do it. You have every right to hate me forever. I'll totally understand if you never want to speak to me again, right? So basically, Tony punished himself enough so that Kim didn't have any space to express her feelings. So he was already doing all the work for her. And so she was kind of left holding this bag full of unexpressed anger and resentment, feeling like, well, what do I do with this? He'll shatter if I express how I really feel in this moment. He's already beating himself up so much, I don't want to add to the pile. So what does she do? Well, she stuffs it down, and she feels increasingly anxious on the inside, and depressed and distrustful, and worried about tucking in all the corners of her anger, lest Tony bump himself on an edge and go seek solace in another woman's arms. So in other words, she responded by becoming increasingly emotionally isolative. So Kim's fear of appearing ungrateful towards her parents was generating a kind of energetic momentum that attracted partners who perpetuated that emotionally dismissive dynamic until she could allow herself to feel what she needed to feel. So feeling her feelings without judgment or dismissal would make it a lot safer for her to be vulnerable, because she would be better able to establish and respect her own boundaries and name and claim her emotions well enough so that she can now experience a full range of them. And that would require not allowing her pain to be crowded out, and acknowledging that if Tony felt upset or criticized by her pain, then it's his responsibility to process those feelings in the appropriate way. And that would be a boundary recognition for both of them. Now, though difficult, if Kim were to allow him to do that on his own, then he might actually gain a better sense of himself and his own personal boundaries and what control he actually has over himself and his behavior. Okay. So, thirdly, I want to offer you these 7 questions because I think it will help you dig into your own emotional boundaries. So if you struggle to define your own emotional boundaries, here are 7 prompts for you. So number 1, in order to feel safe emotionally, I need. What do you need, right? And if you want to, you can just type it right there in the comments. Number 2, I feel the most unsafe in relationships when. So when do you feel unsafe in relationships, right? Number 3, I feel the most excited and connected when. Number 4, I'm the most attracted to. We're keeping this in the realms of your emotions. Number 5, the other side of that. I'm the least attracted to. What are your turn-offs? Okay. Number 6, I would describe my relationship to my own emotions as, what is your relationship to your own emotions? Do you allow for them? Do you cut them off? Are you at war with them? And lastly, what would you want your relationship to your own emotions to be, right? And again, I invite you to reflect on those questions, and you could even put your responses in the comments there, whether you're watching this now or on the replay. And if you want to learn more about this, I do have a playlist on my YouTube channel called Boundaries, and I invite you to check that out.